On November 29th, 1752, a rather interesting individual who went by the name of the Public Universal Friend was born in Rhode Island. They suffered from a severe illness, most likely to be typhus, in 1776. They reported having died and had been reanimated as a genderless evangelist by the name of the Public Universal Friend. They believed that the soul of the person who was assigned female at birth had ascended to the heavens and was replaced with a genderless being. They refused to be referred to by gendered pronouns or their birth name, and they would scold and chastise anyone who attempted to refer to them as such. When people asked the Public Universal Friend, or the Friend for short, if they were a he or a she, they would simply reply with, "I am that I am." In the 1870s, a man by the name of Karl Heinrich Ulrich developed a theory about gender before gender as a concept was ever introduced, or even before the terms homosexual or heterosexual were coined, and it was certainly the building blocks for the gender theory of today. It goes something like this: the reason why there are men who are attracted to men and women who are attracted to women is because in reality they are members of a third sex, a phenomenon he called Uranismus. Since the terms homosexual, gay, lesbian, all of that didn't exist yet, he created his own terms for them. Gay men were Uranians, lesbians were Uranods, heterosexuals were Dianings, while bisexual people were Uranodianings, and so on and so forth. He also referred to gender-variant people as Weiblings, people who were assigned male at birth, but had many feminine characteristics. Obviously, this is a completely outdated theory, but it's really interesting to note how what we understand to be as non-binary identities today were spoken about in discourse a long time before the term homosexual was even officially coined. On October 25th, 1894, one of the most inspiring gender-neutral people in history was born in France. They went by the name of Claude Cahun, and was an artist that was best known for their work of self-portraits. In their self-portraits, they displayed themselves in a very androgynous way, shaved head and never showed their body below their shoulders, as an expression of identity, but also as a statement against the patriarchal gaze. In 1937, they moved to the island of Jersey with their partner, Merkel Moore, who was also a gender-neutral person. After the Nazis occupied Jersey, they became resistance activists and passed out flyers of anti-Nazi propaganda that was informative but also a form of art at the same time, outlining the heinous crimes of the Nazi regime. They would slip them into pockets, cigarette boxes, and chairs of Nazi soldiers. In 1944, both Claude and their partner were arrested and sentenced to death. Luckily, a year later, they were released due to Jersey being liberated from Nazi occupation. However, Claude got sick while imprisoned and never recovered, and tragically died in 1954. Throughout history, non-binary and gender non-conforming people have existed and have been talked about in numerous ways, and hopefully today I can explain to everyone what non-binary is, what non-binary isn't, and hopefully debunk most of the common arguments against our existence and identity, since it is a point of contention amongst the LGBTQ+ community. But before we explain the intricacies of non-binary, we must answer some fundamental questions, such as, what is gender? Sexologist John Money coined the term gender role in 1955, and thus created the epistemological distinction between sex and gender. Many reputable organizations have accepted the fact that gender is a social construct, including, but not limited to, the United Nations, the Human Rights Campaign, the American Psychological Association, the American Medical Association, and the United Kingdom's National Health Service. According to the World Health Organization, which recently stopped classifying transness as a mental disorder, defines gender gender as the socially constructed roles, behaviors, activities, and attributes that a given society considers appropriate for men and women. The majority of articles and studies that attempt to dispute this just end up conflating sex and gender and highlight the biological differences between male and female sexes and claim that disputes gender as a social construct. Gender is what is in your head. It's how you interpret your surroundings and interact with the world. It is your identity. This is not to be confused with gender expression, which is your external appearance of your gender identity. The way you dress, the way you speak, the way you cut your hair, the pronouns you use are all expressions of your gender identity. I'll explain why the distinction between the two is so important later on, but the fact of the matter is, whether you're cisgender or—
But Gorilla Gadio, cisgender is an insult and I don't like it.
Cisgender is absolutely not an insulting term. Well, not inherently anyway, and I'm tired of people continuing to push this notion. Cis is a Latin-derived prefix meaning on the side of, while trans is also a Latin-derived prefix meaning on the other side of. Cisgender means you identify with your gender assigned at birth. You are on the side of your gender assigned at birth. Transgender means you identify as a gender that differentiates from your gender assigned at birth. You are on the other side of your gender assigned at birth. Anywho, whether you are cisgender, transgender, non-binary, gender non-conforming, you express your gender in some way. Unless you're agender, of course, but hey, I'm getting ahead of myself on that one.
Listen, I see your point. Gender is a social construct, blah 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 blah, but gender is based off of sex, and sex is binary. Therefore, gender is binary as well, stupid fucking gorilla dumbass.
On the contrary. Sex is not a binary. Contrary to popular belief, it is a bimodal distribution of characteristics including, but not limited to, the amount and type of sex chromosomes, external genitalia, internal reproductive anatomy, sex hormones, and so on and so forth. Here is a diagram from the Scientific American showcasing the diverse range of sex conditions that shows the true ambiguous reality of sexual characteristics. Intersex people have ambiguous combinations of multiple different sex characteristics. Some people end up with having XY chromosomes but have a vagina, and some intersex people end up with XXY or XXX chromosomes. There is a quite high range of possibilities. Furthermore, secondary sex characteristics determined by hormones such as estrogen and testosterone, which give us broader shoulders and sharper jawlines and so on, exist in all people regardless of their gender identity or sex.
Okay, but intersex people are outliers, an error, a mistake. They're wrong, God's little accident. That's not a happy one, therefore it's still binary, my young chap.
Binary, in this context, is defined as a division into two groups or classes that are considered diametrically opposite. Therefore, if there are instances of sex characteristics that are not diametrically opposed to each other, even if it is an error, that still means it's not a binary. For example, binary code only contains 1s and 0s. If said code contains 3s and 4s, even if it's some sort of glitch in the system, that code is no longer binary because more than two diametric opposites are at play. With all this data at hand, it pretty much dispels the notion that there are only two sexes. Our binary conception of gender is based off of our binary conception of sex, a conception that was incorrect to begin with. Our social construction of the gender binary was and is incorrect.
Okay, sure, that makes sense and all, but doesn't that mean you have to be intersex in order to be non-binary?
Well, let's take this argument to its logical conclusion. If that were the case, then you would have to be 100% biologically male in order to be a man, and 100% biologically female in order to be a woman. So that would take the common argument against non-binary people and flip it on its head. Now binary trans people can no longer exist, according to that logic.
Gender dysphoria, previously known as gender identity disorder, is something that has been around forever, whereas this new wave of non-binary is literally something that's popped up maybe since 2014 and on.
Google Trends shows it.
Many societies and cultures have set a historical precedent for recognizing genders outside of man and woman. For instance, the Hajiras are officially considered a third gender by the Indian government, although they are unfortunately heavily marginalized by the population. Violence against Hajiras, specifically Hajira sex workers, is very commonplace in India. In Oman, as well as other parts of the Arabian Peninsula, the term Kanith is used to describe people who function as males sexually, but in certain social ways function as women. In cultures in Ndongo, there are third gender people known as Cibaros. In Indonesia, Waria is what they call their traditional third gender role. A plethora of different cultures express gender in various different ways, as do we in Western culture. Non-binary as a concept isn't something new at all. The term that is now widely accepted and used is. This has happened countless times throughout history. Gay used to mean happy, now it typically means homosexual people. Queer used to be a derogatory slur against the LGBTQ community, now it's an overwhelmingly positive term. This is just linguistics 101. Terms for certain concepts change over time, they always have, it's nothing new. If your main argument against the existence of non-binary people is that the term didn't become prominent until recent years, you're just being disingenuous at that point.
But of course, non-binary people typically don't even go by he or him or she and hers. They go by they and them, z and zer. There's others.
The usage of singular they goes all the way back to 1375 in the medieval romance William and the Wolf. And of course, forms of speech typically exist long before they are written, so it's very possible that there was usage of it even before that. It wasn't until the 18th century that grammarians began saying that singular they was improper grammar. What they didn't seem to remember is that the word you was originally a plural pronoun before it became singular. In 1660, George Fox, who is the founder of Quakerism, actually wrote an entire book about how if you use the singular you are an idiot and a fool. Despite this, many 19th and 20th century writers such as Jane Austen and W.H. Auden still use singular they in their works. Additionally, Merriam-Webster has recently added the non-binary use of they to their dictionary due to meeting all of their criteria: meaningful use, sustained use, and widespread use. There are many legitimate reasons to use the singular they. Perhaps you're speaking of someone and you have no clue what their gender is. Perhaps you're speaking of someone and you wish to conceal their identity for whichever reason. You yourself have probably used singular they without even realizing it. Case in point, language evolves over time. This is also linguistics 101. Pretty basic stuff. Overall, if you're against the use of singular they, then unfortunately for you, the paradigm is shifting overwhelmingly, whether you like it or not.
Okay. Like, honey, I'm very aware you guys exist. You're very loud. You make yourself known. No one's saying you don't exist. I'm just saying you're not the same thing as being trans, and that's okay. And that's not bad. Why do people only get upset when I say being trans is different than non-binary, but yet people can make all these other distinctions like pansexual is not the same thing as bisexual, and this sexual is slightly different than this sexuality, and this label is slightly different. Why does everyone get a different label, but I have to be labeled with this? Make it make sense.
An umbrella term is a word or phrase that covers a wide range of concepts belonging to a common category. For example, cryptology is an umbrella term that encompasses cryptography and cryptanalysis, among other fields. Queer is an umbrella term that a plethora of people fall under, whether you're gay, bi, lesbian, trans, pansexual, demisexual, questioning, etc. Trans is an umbrella term for people who do not identify with their gender assigned at birth. Trans could mean people who are MTF, FTM, and so on and so forth. Non-binary people also do not identify with their gender assigned at birth. Ergo, they are de facto trans. In fact, the white line on the transgender pride flag, created by Monica Helms in 1999, represents people who are currently transitioning, have a neutral or undefined gender, as well as intersex people. Non-binary people are represented on the trans flag. You don't get any more trans than that, Blair! Now, of course, not all non-binary people accept the trans label, and that's perfectly valid and okay. But it's also perfectly valid and okay if you do as well. Furthermore, nobody's saying that non-binary trans and binary trans is the same thing. In fact, quite the opposite. We're just saying that if we're going by the textbook definition of trans, non-binary people fall under that umbrella. To harken back to a point I made previously before I was rudely interrupted, gender expression is defined by a person's behavior, mannerisms, interests, and appearance that are associated with gender in a particular cultural context, specifically with the categories of femininity or masculinity, but not always. The way you dress, the way you speak, the way you cut your hair, the pronouns you use are all expressions of your gender identity. All people, both transgender and cisgender, express their gender in a variety of different ways. It really does all depend on the person, and whatever they're comfortable with. Another reoccurring argument I hear against non-binary people frequently is, well, guys can be feminine and girls can be masculine, you know? Well, nobody's saying that you can't. People should be free to express their gender identity however they wish, whether they be cisgender or transgender. You identify as a boy but want to put on makeup? Cool. You identify as a girl and want short hair? Awesome. People can be gender non-conforming without identifying as non-binary, and nobody has a problem with that. Okay, some people do, but certainly not non-binary people. However, people expressing their gender in more alternative ways has caused a lot of controversy within the LGBTQ community, such as he/him lesbians, especially some butch lesbians that still identify as women but use he/him pronouns as an expression of masculinity, therefore consider themselves he/him lesbians. I personally don't see this as an issue, but a lot of people seem to get angry about it. You know, being both non-binary and an anarchist, I noticed there's a lot of overlap. Honestly, identifying as non-binary is the most anarchist thing you can do regarding gender. Fuck your binary, fuck your rules, I'm going my own way. And will present however I damn well please, regardless of your societal expectations. But at the same time, we can fight in one another, support each other within the community, mutual aid, if you will. That's the main reason I'm doing this video. I've been asked a lot of questions about non-binary in general since I came out nearly a year ago. So I'm attempting to answer some of the most frequently asked questions in a clear and concise way, not only for myself, but for all my NBs out there that want to spread awareness and educate others. A lot of people ask me when or how I realized I'm non-binary. And honestly, it's quite hard to explain to somebody who's never experienced it before. As a child, I really wanted to act feminine, wear feminine clothing, put on lipstick, so on and so forth, but I was scolded about this. Don't act like one of those queers, son. Your hair's getting too long, you're a boy. I had an overwhelming feeling that I'm not what I want to be. This feeling was magnified tenfold when I hit puberty, but unfortunately, by then I was just gaslighted into thinking I'm just a hormonal teenager. So I figured all these feelings would just pass. They didn't. The way I felt and still feel about the gender roles that were assigned to me and are expected of me can be summed up by how Morpheus described the Matrix. The Matrix is everywhere. It's all around us. Even now in this very room. You can see it when you look out your window, or when you turn on your television. You can feel it when you go to work, when you go to church, when you pay your taxes. It is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth. A common thing people will say to non-binary people is, oh, you just want attention. And I can tell you for certain that most of the attention that you get being NB or trans is negative. I know non-binary people both online and real life that are too afraid to come out due to the negative social stigma. We're constantly gaslighted by people who don't understand how gender or sex works, told that we're just confused cis people or confused binary trans people, and so on. I myself have had many problems with friendships and romantic relationships directly related to my gender. A lot of it really hasn't been a fun experience, and definitely not the kind of attention myself or anybody else really wants. Not to mention, this is the same argument that was used against gay people not too long ago. Oh, you're not really gay, you're just faking it for attention. It's despicable. Like, it's fine if you don't understand what non-binary is, or have some questions about it, but to make people feel bad about themselves, just because it's something you don't understand, it's not cool. It's not fucking cool at all. So I just want to say this video is dedicated to every non-binary person, whether you've been out of the closet for a long time, or you're still in the closet. I made this one for you. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope I did well at explaining what non-binary is, what it isn't, and dispelled most of the common arguments against our existence.
I'm sorry, but I'm still not buying it. Non-binary people don't exist.
What? Of course we exist. I'm right here.
No, you don't.
What? Wait. No.
No!